Greetings and welcome, one and all. My name is Father Kieran McDermott, the administrator of this cathedral church, and I'm pleased that so many have responded to this initiative, a collaboration between the James Joyce Centre Dublin and St Mary's Pro-Cathedral, the home of the Palestrina choir, which, as you know, marks the 120th year since its foundation. In several of Joyce's works, brief references are made to his early life as a student in Ireland, particularly UCD, where he made the profound religious transition from a pious Catholic boy who at Belvedere College had seriously considered joining the Jesuits, to the forceful intellectual who, having grown in his literary self-confidence and ability, challenged his belief in the Catholic faith before he emigrated to mainland Europe, going on, as we know, to create his masterpieces, Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake. Life in the Pro-Cathedral appears throughout Joyce's literature, from the Clonliffe curates attending the Easter ceremonies here in his early writings and Stephen Hero, to Mrs. Mooney in the short story The Boarding House in Dubliners, attending the short Mass at the Pro on Sundays. In Ulysses, two curates from the Pro, the Reverend J. Flavin and the Reverend J. Flanagan, attended the blessing of Barney Kiernan's pub in Little Britain Street, which is just off Capel Street. Music was an enormous part of Joyce's young life. Both his parents, John Stanislaus Joyce and Mary May Murray, sang in concerts and in choirs throughout Dublin City. His mother, in particular, gave Joyce a deep love of church music. By all accounts, James had a fine tenor voice, and when in the mood, and he certainly had to be in the mood, was occasionally accompanied by his mother at the piano. Songs from Gilbert and Sullivan's The Gondoliers and Serenade by Shelley were among his favourites. So I welcome you, whether you're a PhD Joycean scholar, a literary 20th century aficionado, or just out for the night, celebrating the traditional Bloomsday. There's something for everybody. So I invite you to sit back, to relax, and to rejoice.
I don't think you came to hear me or two priests. I know you want to hear the music. This church building and the Palestrina choir that has its home here in the Pro-Cathedral have a special place and affection in the culture and the history of Dublin, particularly Dublin City. But they have a special place in the musical history of Dublin, and they have a unique place in that particular world of religious music, which is spoken of in Ulysses as sacred music splendid. More than many of you, both as a student and later for 16 years as Archbishop, I have been enthralled, enthused, and spiritually stirred by the music of the Palestrina choir. Because sacred music can inspire and open even the unbeliever or the disenchanted believer into reflection on some of the deeper dimensions of our being, and even on what God might mean. Shortly we'll hear pieces that are performed here year after year as the liturgy celebrates the life, the passage of the life of Jesus Christ. And perhaps I shouldn't have used the term performed, because sacred music is never just performance. It's rather something that embraces, encompasses, and captures something of the human spirit. Sacred music is part of the DNA of this building. Unam sanctam et apostolicam ecclesiam intruibo gloria in excelsis exilla regis sacerdos magnus pangelingua. They're all part of the everyday language of this cathedral. But this evening is unique in that we're to be introduced into these and other sacred words by the words of James Joyce. It's quite a unique occasion. And I feel I can say that over decades, while music filled the walls of the Pro-Cathedral and the hearts of its congregations, it's most unlikely that the two words, James Joyce, would have been uttered often here, except in condemnation. And condemnation there was, from the religious leadership. Just listen to this one that some of you will know. It talks about Ulysses. Only a person who had been a Catholic, only one with an incurably diseased mind, could be so diabolically venomous towards God, towards the Blessed Sacrament, towards the Virgin. And he says, the critics say, how brave. The sexual neurotics say, how lovely. And the normal person said, I'm sick. Now, I read other condemnations. One struck me particularly because it talked about the obscenities that are at the heart of Joyce's work. And this religious commentator felt it so necessary to spell out in detail what these obscenities were that it would now be totally inappropriate for me to read out his critical comments in a sacred place. Thank God we're in different times, and again we have the opportunity now to sit back and relax, as Kieran said, and let this sacred music, splendid, which is a great description of the Palestrina choir, let it touch our curiosity as it did with James Joyce, and perhaps somehow touch a more profound chord in each of our hearts as we listen reflectively. Thank you.
And so to the music. Our first piece of music is from Missa Pape Marcelli from Ulysses. The Palestrina choir has its origins in a boys' choir formed in the 1890s by Dr. Vincent O'Brien, then a music teacher at St. Mary's Place Christian Brothers School in Dublin. It was a performance of Palestrina's Missa Pape Marcelli in St. Teresa's Carmelite Church in Clarendon Street in 1898 that this choir and its gifted director, Vincent O'Brien, first came to the attention of one Edward Martin. It is believed that Joyce's mother may indeed have sang at this performance, and a young Joyce may well have been in attendance. Edward Martin wished to promote the music of Palestrina as a standard to which liturgical music should aspire to. Between 1898 and 1902, Martin worked tirelessly to establish the choir of St. Mary's Pro-Cathedral. The agreement was, but on condition that Dr. O'Brien was appointed choir master. The agreement was signed on November 26, 1902, and the Palestrina choir was constituted and installed in the Pro-Cathedral on January 1st, 120 years ago. Joyce references this interest and passion in Palestrina within Ulysses. At a Mass in All Hallows in West End Row, Leopold Bloom thinks of church music and of Palestrina in particular. Those old popes keen on music, on art and statues and pictures of all kinds. Palestrina, for example, too. And right at the beginning of Ulysses, the character Stephen Dedalus thinks in particular of this Mass for Pope Marcellus. The proud, potent titles clanged over Stephen's memory, the triumph of their brazen bells. Et unum sanctum catholicam et apostolicam ecclesiam, the slow growth and change of rite and dogma, like his own rare thoughts, a chemistry of stars. symbols of the apostles in the Mass for Pope Marcellus, the voices blended, singing alone, loud in affirmation. Joyce gives us a Dublin in full song, and tonight we'll experience Joyce's Dublin full of the most incredible church music. Let me bring you now to Sandymount Strand, about this time of the evening, 8 p.m, and three girlfriends are seated on the rocks: Cissy Caffrey, Edie Boardman, and Gertie McDowell. The summer evening had begun to fold the world in its mysterious embrace. Far away in the west, the sun was setting, and the last glow of all too fleeting day lingered lovingly on sea and strand. On the proud promontory of dear old Hoath, guarding as ever the waters of the bay, on the weed-grown rocks along sandy Mount Shore, and last but not least, on the quiet church whence there streamed forth at times upon the stillness the voice of prayer to her who is in her pure radiance a beacon ever to the storm-tossed heart of man, Mary, Star of the Sea. Queen of angels, Queen of patriarchs, Queen of prophets, of all saints they prayed. Queen of the most holy rosary. And then Father Conroy handed the thurible to Canon O'Hanlon, and he put in the incense and sensed the blessed sacrament. And Sissy Caffrey caught the two twins, and she was itching to give them a good ringing clip on the ear. But she didn't, because she thought he might be watching. But she never made a bigger mistake in all her life, because Gertie could see without looking that he never took her eyes off her. And then Canon O'Hanlon handed the thurible back to Father Conroy and knelt down looking up at the Blessed Sacrament, and the choir began to sing the Tantum Ergo, and she just swung her foot in and out in time as the music rose and fell to the Tantum Ergosa Cramentum. Our next piece of music is Mozart's 12th Mass, or as I found out, not Mozart at all. Joyce's father, John Stanislaus Joyce, was also a talented singer, if not a talented father. In 1881, just a year before Joyce was born, he sings at a concert with Vincent O'Brien. The concert was organised by a friend of the family's, Vincent's father, Richard Vincent O'Brien. The first part of this concert was devoted entirely to Mozart's 12th Mass, which was hugely popular in the late 19th century. The work was finally attributed in the 20th century to Wenzel Müller. In Ulysses, Bloom shares this Edwardian love of the 12th Mass. He discusses it as he walks home to 7 Eccles Street with Stephen Dedalus, late on the 9th of June 16th, 1904. So they turned on to chatting about music, a form of art for which Bloom, as a pure amateur, possessed the greatest love, as they made tracks arm in arm across Beresford Place. Wagnerian music, though confessedly grand in its way, was a bit too heavy for Bloom and hard to follow at the first go-off. But the music of Mercadante's Huguenots, Meyerbeer's 7 Last Words on the Cross, and Mozart's 12th Mass he simply revelled in. The glory in that being, to his mind, the acme of first-class music as such, literally knocking everything else into a cocked hat. piece is a favourite of mine, and I'm so delighted that we're doing this evening. In Ulysses, of course, Molly Bloom is a singer and goes by the concert name of Madame Marion Tweedy. We learn that she is well known singing soprano in concerts and churches all around the city of Dublin. This is a world very familiar to Joyce. We can think of all the references to the musical life of the church in stories like The Dead, which was based on the life of his maternal aunts, the Mrs. Flynn of Usher's Island. In Ulysses, Molly remembers a passionate embrace after singing Gounod's Ave Maria. Bartle Darcy, too, that he used to make fun of when he commenced kissing me on the choir stairs after I sang Gounod's Ave Maria. Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man is the most autobiographical work of James Joyce, although he's a divil for using the real names of people throughout the city. In fact, even some members, family members of the Palestrina choir have been referenced in Joyce's work, in Portrait of the Artist in particular. The character of Stephen Dedalus is most like a young James Joyce. In a passage from a portrait, he's discussing Aquinas with his college friend Lynch. It's hard to imagine UCD students hanging around discussing Aquinas like that today. Perhaps Aquinas would understand me better than you. He was a poet himself. He wrote a hymn for Maundy Thursday. It begins with the words, Panga lingua gloriosi. They say it is the highest glory of the hymnal. It is an intricate and soothing hymn. I like it. But there is no hymn that can be put beside that mournful and majestic processional song, the Vexilla Regis of Ven Actius Fortunatus. Lynch began to sing softly and solemnly in a deep bass voice. "That's great," he said, well pleased. Great music. Easter week is such a special week here at the Pro-Cathedral, and anyone who hasn't experienced it, I would encourage you all to attend some of the Easter ceremonies here. Our next piece of music is O Vos Omnes from Vittoria. And Joyce remained interested in the Easter ceremonies throughout his life. He wrote a poem called Tenebrae in 1901, which sadly has been lost. And in 1903, one of his regular begging letters home when he was studying in Paris, he wrote, "Dear Mother, tell Stanny to send me at once a Holy Week book, large, black print with no references. Send Holy Week book in time for Tenebrae on Wednesday." You'd be glad to hear that the book arrived on time. A very poignant reference to the Pro-Cathedral was made in Stephen Hero, which went on to become a portrait of the artist as a young man. On Spy Wednesday night, Cranley and Stephen attended the office of Tenebrae in the Pro-Cathedral. They went round to the back of the altar and knelt behind the students from Clonliffe who were chanting the office. Edward Martin was not only instrumental in the foundation of the Palestrina choir, but also in the establishment of the annual Feis Ceoil music competitions, co-founding them in 1897 with Annie Wilson Petterson. In 1903, the Feis Ceoil singing competition for tenor voice was won by one John McCormack. a valued member of the Palestrina choir. The prize was a year-long scholarship to study in Italy. On his return to Ireland, he persuaded his friend, James Joyce, to enter the feis. The preparation, Joyce took singing lessons from Vincent O'Brien. And I've just heard from Elizabeth O'Brien, who's here in the audience, that he wasn't the easiest person to teach and would challenge the lyrics of the song for authenticity and otherwise. Of course, there's controversy about the feis ceoil competition, and did Joyce storm off in a huff with the sight reading section of the competition. Joyce, in the end, won a bronze medal, and McCormack, once again, took the gold. Joyce sometimes compared his voice, his tenor voice, to that of McCormack's. He said to his friend Poor Colum in Paris, "John McCormack's voice and mine are so similar in texture that more than once when a disc of McCormack's has been on, the girl in the kitchen has thought it was me." One of the most famous pieces of music that John McCormack recorded was, of course, Panis Angelicus. Joyce was a little derogatory about John McCormack sometimes, and in Finnegan's Wake called him Whatcha-McCormack. But in Finnegan's Wake, he says, "I heard a voice, the voice of Shem, voice of the Irish, voice from afar, and cert no pure Palestrina air chanted pan angelical mid the clouds of tu e Petrus." John Henry Newman was founder of the Catholic University that went on to become UCD, which of course was the alma mater for James Joyce. Of Newman, Joyce said, "I have read him a great deal, and in Oxen of the Sun and Ulysses, where all authors are parodied, Newman alone is rendered pure. In the grave beauty of his style, besides, I needed a fulcrum to hold up the rest." He added, "The church will surely decide to make a saint of him." In Ulysses, Molly Bloom remembers that Leopold tried to set "lead kindly light to music." We'll hear tonight a setting not by Leopold Bloom, but instead by Arthur Sullivan. It's Molly who mentions this. "The last concert I sang at, where it's over a year ago, when was it? St. Teresa's Hall, Clarendon Street. Little chits of missies they have now singing, Kathleen Carney and her like, on account of father been in the army, and my singing the absent-minded beggar and wearing my brooch for Lord Roberts, when I had the map of it all. And Poldy not Irish enough, was it? Him managed it this time, I wouldn't put it past him. Like he got me on to sing in the Stabat Mater by going around saying he was putting lead kindly light to music. I put him up to that."
Oh
next song is a setting of the Yeats poem, Down by the Sally Gardens. Edward Martin, and founder of the choir, was a good friend of W.B. Yeats and with many of those involved with the literary and language revival. The revival and the Pro-Cathedral make an appearance in a short story, A Mother, from Dubliners. When the Irish revival began to be appreciable, Mrs. Carney determined to take advantage of her daughter's name and brought an Irish teacher to the house. Kathleen and her sisters sent Irish picture postcards to their friends, and these friends sent back each other Irish picture postcards. On special Sundays, when Mr. Carney went out with his family to the Pro-Cathedral, a little crowd of people would assemble after Mass at the corner of Cathedral Street. They were all friends of the Carneys, musical friends or national friends, and when they had played every little counter of gossip, they shook hands with one another all together, laughing at the crossing of so many hands, and said goodbye to each other in Irish. The story A Mother is about a concert that takes place in the ancient concert rooms now on Pearse Street. In the summer of 1904, James Joyce fell in love with Nora Barnacle and performed in a real-life concert with John McCormack in those very same ancient concert rooms. Joyce chose to sing Down by the Sally Gardens and told Nora that he would sing it specially for her. It's mentioned in the Freeman's Journal of the 29th of August, 1904. A concert was given in the large hall of the ancient concert rooms on Saturday night and attracted a full house. Mr. J.C. Doyle sang a number of songs in first-rate style, and Mr. James A. Joyce, the possessor of a sweet tenor voice, sang charmingly the Sally Gardens and gave a pathetic rendering of the Croppy Boy. Mr. J.F. McCormack was the hero of the evening. It was announced that it was his last public appearance in Ireland. One of my favourite episodes or chapters in Ulysses is the Circe episode, which takes place in Nighttown, very close to us here in the heart of the Hibernian metropolis. The Holy City is sung in this chapter by a gramophone. Through the drifting fog without, the gramophone blares over coughs and feet shuffling. The gramophone, Jerusalem, open your gates and sing Hosanna. An earlier mention of the Holy City appears with Father Moran, again in Stephen Hero. Father Moran appears to have been based on a Dr. Doherty, who was a curate in the Pro-Cathedral, who in real life may have had the following conversation with James Joyce. Father Moran was no lover of the old droning chants, he told Stephen. Of course, he said, it is very grand music, severe style of music, but he held the opinion that the church must not be made too gloomy. And he said with a charming smile that the spirit of the church was not gloomy. He said that one could not expect the people to take kindly to severe music, and that the people needed more human religious music than the Gregorian, and ended by advising Stephen to learn The Holy City by Adams. There's a song now, beautiful, full of lovely melody, and yet religious. In fact, it has the religious sentiment, a touching melody, power, soul, in fact. And so we reach the end of our concert with one final song. And I hope you agree that tonight has been really extraordinary. This has been, I don't know how long in the making, at least a year, working with the Palestrina 120 committee, working with the incredible Blánaid Murphy and all of the team here, Father McDermott, and a special thanks to Archbishop Diarmuid Martin, who was so interested in this project and thinking about all the connections and shared life of Joyce and the church in Dublin, and how we can celebrate our history through all kinds of cultural ways and means. The last song of the evening we give back to Vincent O'Brien, and he appears in Ulysses, named, singing Handel's Messiah. Again, it's in the wonderful Circe episode, so close to us here in the city centre. Bloom thinks about the Messiah earlier in Ulysses. He thinks about the Mirrus Bazaar that the vice-regal coach is going to. The 16th, today it is. The Mirrus Bazaar is in aid of the funds for Mercer's Hospital. The Messiah was first given for that. Yes, Handel. What about going out there? Ball's Bridge. But Vincent O'Brien, of course, appears with a choir of 600 voices, conducted by Vincent O'Brien, sings the chorus from Handel's Messiah, Alleluia, for the Lord God omnipotent reigneth, accompanied on the organ by Joseph Glynn. Bloom in this episode becomes mute, shrunken, carbonized.
Lord Mayor, Arina Ushla, I hope that you enjoyed this evening's performance. On behalf of the Palestrina Choir 120 Committee, we would like to extend our deep gratitude to a number of people without whom this concert would not have succeeded as it has this evening. Firstly, we would like to acknowledge with gratitude the wonderful support we have received from Father Kieran McDermott and the entire staff of the Pro-Cathedral. We would also like to thank Archbishop Martin for sharing his wonderful and marvellous insights and knowledge of Joyce's work. And to Darina Gallagher, this was her vision, and her enthusiasm has been infectious. So thank you very much. And finally, to our esteemed director, Blánaid Murphy. As ever, thank you.